But
trust
then
the
you'll talk
process.
forever and then you'll move on to the
No,
next subject and then we'll
no.
get an opportunity to
If
say it.
someone-
Basically, this is why we got divorced.
Is the thought of being imperfect keeping you from taking action? Welcome to Inspired Action for Imperfect Humans. Each week, we give you real-life stories and thought-provoking research that inspires your soul to live a more fulfilled life through your own actions. From the heart of Calgary, Canada, here are your hosts, award-winning coaches, Christopher Lawrence and Kyle Kalu.
Welcome to another exciting podcast. Where's the trust at these days? Like, who's trustworthy in the city? Who has trust? You know, here's an interesting thing. First of all, before I get started.
Oh, can I say something?
I was just going to say, Christopher, hello. How are you?
Hi, Kyle.
How are you?
Listen, I was going to say, if we're looking for trust, we won't find it in you.
Okay, that actually might be true on one particular occasion, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, in a second, because
I can't wait.
For leaders.
Folks, this is being recorded, and Kyle never admits his mistakes.
We are plagued with this thing about trust. And I think there's two camps of trust. And I'm curious where you sit on trust. There's one camp that says, listen, you have to earn my trust. Like, you have to earn it. You have to do things to earn it. I don't give it away. It takes time for me. Depends on what's happening, right? So that camp that, hey, you have to earn my trust, right? And then the other camp, which is like me, who's like, I have no reason not to trust you. Like, I'll freely give it. I'll freely say, hey, you know what? Sure. Until you prove me wrong, right? Until you've done something that is not trustworthy. So which camp are you in, A or B?
Yeah, I'm in the camp that says trust requires equaling levels of vulnerability. So I think that in society we have we create hierarchies in society. Yeah. And I think my value system says that if you are higher on that hierarchy, and look, I'm not saying I like the hierarchy, because my position is that, like, human beings are human beings. So I don't care if your name is Oprah Winfrey, the Queen of England, or whatever. You are just another human being who's making, like, I really don't do the pedestal thing very much in life. And I'm so sorry, Kyle. That means you have fallen from grace in my eyes. Anyway,
everyone has fallen from your grace. That's a true story.
So from my perspective, I think it requires equaling levels. So my value system says that if you are higher on that level, or you believe you're higher on that level, even though it's just a man-made thing, right? Or a human-made thing, rather, then I think you need to lead with vulnerability to create trust first. That doesn't always happen. So maybe your leader or someone in your life that would be considered higher on this stupid hierarchy we create has had some trauma or something. So then that person might need to lead with vulnerability instead. But I think that trust comes from equaling vulnerabilities. And we see this because trust gets broken so fast when one person is more vulnerable than another person, and then they continue to be vulnerable and the other person doesn't go there, then the person who's vulnerable stops sharing, they stop being vulnerable, they stop showing up. So that's kind of, maybe I take a weird perspective. So I do think that trust is earned. I think trust is earned, but we have to have a starting place. And I say we start fairly at a micro level, and then we just grow.
Okay. I want to
get like it grows and grows, but it has to grow on both sides.
Yeah, I want to get to vulnerability, trust in a second. The work that we do, we usually call it vulnerability-based trust. So I want to get back to that in a second, what you mean by that. So, because I'm sure people are wondering, like, trust is trust, right? I just want to go back to something you talk about, the hierarchy there for a second, because right or wrong, people are going to put people in that type of different categories, because when you're a leader, based on your title, regardless of how, approachable you are, people have a certain way of perceiving you, right or wrong. They just do.
Agreed.
So they're going to sometimes automatically figure, well, he's a leader, I better trust him. All right. And that's usually what happens. We just
See,
need to
but
validate that.
that's my problem with it too, because I am an employee advocate more than I am a leader advocate. And
That's true.
when I
Amen.
say that, that doesn't mean I'm against the leader. I'm not against the leader. What it means is that I think leaders forget how far they've come, and I think they're so busy trying to
Right.
manage what their higher ups are giving them that
Right.
they're actually forgetting to lead with human first, right? They're
Okay.
forgetting to lead with the human factor. So here's the thing with this. The one of the things that drives me nuts about the employee factor is that employees' expectations of their leaders, because they do pedestal them,
Hmm.
it they're out of line with reality. The reality is that all of our leaders are just human beings, and they are
True.
far from perfect. And I think leaders, some of the reason why they get into where they are is because they've chosen to take on more risk and make more mistakes than other people who maybe choose to play it safe. I know there's a whole bunch of bias in what I just said, but
Yeah.
do you understand what I'm
Of
saying?
course. Of course. I do. I mean, I do. And I think we could unpack that in a couple different ways as well. And yes, there are humans. And sometimes, they're believing the hype themselves, thinking, I cannot, since I'm the leader, I cannot fail. I cannot this. And they create into something that is not sustainable. That's the issue. It's not sustainable. And then when they fall from grace, so to speak, then it becomes a bigger issue, right? And I've said, previously to teams that I've worked with, I said, listen, I don't mind eating crow. I just like to eat it when it's young and tender. I don't need something to happen where you fail to tell me, six,
Yeah,
eight
you
months
need
that
to
we were
know
doing wrong.
soon.
Yeah, I need
That's
to
it.
know soon so I can get in front of it.
My trust is my trust is instantly broken when, and there I have my own issue to work on around this, and I do, but when I've been vulnerable and I create what I believe is a safe space. So I share vulnerabilities, I express vulnerabilities, the whole bit. And then I find out 6 months later that somebody was pissed at me or didn't like what I was
Mhm.
doing or was upset. I'm
Right.
like, but you didn't tell me.
Mhm.
And especially if I find out about it through the grapevine, I'm just like, now I'm like, I go to that place, it's a trigger for me. Like I go to that place of like, fuck you.
Mhm.
Like I poured my heart, I did my very best. And the only thing I asked was that you came to me. And I know it's hard to come, but I even tell people, especially team members, but I tell friends, everybody, I'm like, even if you don't know what to say, you can say, I'm upset with you and I don't know the word, I don't have the words
Mhm.
or whatever. But it's like when I find out like way after the fact that somebody didn't say something and they've been harboring it, or it changed their impression of me without giving me an
Right.
opportunity to respond to it,
Mhm.
I lose so much trust in that moment.
Okay, so tell me about that. What happens when you lose trust in someone? How is the interaction usually like for you?
Um, well, I'm a little bit similar to you because I know
Mhm.
for you, like when Kyle's done, he's done. Like you are
Yeah.
dismissed. Like he's done with you. For me, I'd say I have a little bit of that where it's just like I'm done with you. But I think for me, the interaction, it's certainly more contentious. And I tend to go to a place of questioning. So I try to, you know, take, take the approach of like, I need you to explain to me what happened. So I start to ask questions. And my intention is not to grill them, right?
But
But
sometimes
it
it
is
feels that
to,
way. I
I'm
can tell
sure
you
it
from the
can fit.
prison end, it feels that way. Make no
From the
mistake.
did you say I can tell you from the prisoner's end? Do you feel like you're
No,
in a prison when you interact with
no,
me?
no. From the person that's on the other end, sometimes it feels that way. And there's times where I think I've been chatting with you, and you're like, yeah, but and I can't even get a word in because you already are saying,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And sometimes it could
Yeah,
also
but
feel
to be
punitive,
fair,
right?
you break trust with me at least 4 times a day. So 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 it's different with you than it is with other people.
Okay. And I
So
think that's what's
it has to be punitive because that's what
yes,
you're
it
used
doesn't. It
to.
doesn't have to be, but I think that's what's happening for people. Because I remember a situation where, we went through a period in the business where, the expenses were going more out faster than the income was coming in. I'll never forget this day, and maybe it's the triggering of the date that's coming up. It was on June 18th. I was in Atlanta, Georgia, and it happened to be my birthday as well. And so you called and you were calling about all these other things. And in that moment, I'm just like, I already know it's going to work out. But in that moment, you're seeing numbers and you're seeing different things and I just thought, oh, I need to tell him this. But, so the vulnerability based trust for me is about, I have to tell him this. He's going to react the way he's going to react, which is not going to be good. Right. And I just have to allow that to happen. Right? Because sometimes we're trying to spare ourselves, right? When we're not honest with certain things. And I think that's one of the things when we talk about how you can increase trust with people is by being honest. And it's sometimes with withholding that honesty where we're like, well, I wasn't lying. And these are the things we tell ourselves is because we're trying to avoid the interaction or the conflict, right? That's happening. And I know for me, that's exactly what I was trying to avoid, especially on my birthday, dude. Like, it was my birthday and you're asking me these stupid ass questions about where's this? Where's the money coming from this? What about this expense? Let me understand. He was just
See,
going
if
off.
you took care of business before you left, it wouldn't have happened on your birthday.
True,
But
probably.
girl, you left, and
Probably.
I'm like,
I didn't
oh,
want to
I'm
deal
going
with
to take
it.
an opportunity here, and
I'm
but
being honest that I did not want to deal with it. I did not want to have
see
that
that,
conversation.
but that does
Yeah.
happen though, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think that it does happen, and we do fear other people's reactions. For sure, we do. We fear other people's reactions. We don't want to let people down. I think in North America, we're funny about it. I think particularly in Canada, if I'm stereotyping, and I am stereotyping,
Right.
not all Canadians are like this way, but
Mm-hmm.
but just in my own bias, my own experience, I see a lot of this. There's more avoidance of conflict than there is actual, like, have conflict and learn to make it productive,
Yeah.
which is something you teach. Actually, you teach productive
Yeah.
conflict in your
Yeah.
team trainings.
Yeah. And so this is what happens when you think about, and this is not just leaders, this is individual team members, followers, people on the team. I think when we think about trust, and then I'll give you an opportunity to respond to this on vulnerability-based trust, is when we talk about vulnerability-based trust in our workshops that we do, one of the main thing is vulnerability-based trust is admitting mistakes, is actually asking for help, right? Because sometimes it may sound like, listen, I actually messed up, right? Using one of Christopher's common words, I effed up. You know what I mean? And just saying this is what it is, and knowing that it can go either way, right? That's the vulnerabilities, not knowing how it's going to play out, right? What would
The
you
only
say
way
when you
that
think of vulnerability based?
Yeah, that only works. I agree with you. That only works when it does have to be non-punitive, which doesn't, like, here's the thing is that we all have different impressions of punitive. Like, if your
Yeah.
boss is disappointed or angry, some people perceive that as being punitive. But here's the thing, or your employee even, right? Your team member. People are allowed to have their emotions. And
Yeah.
so we end up in this weird, messed up situation in our culture where I feel like it's like we don't make it safe for people to admit their mistakes.
Yeah.
We don't make it safe for people to admit their mistakes. We because we have emotional reactions, and I think
Right.
in our society we tend to be punitive on top of punitive. Like, making the mistake is punitive enough. The person feels like crap already. We don't need to further punish and further punish and further punish on top of the mistake that they've made. That's the problem. And then the other issue is that I think in North America, we actually don't have a good relationship with anger. We see it as wrong or bad or whatever, but anger is an emotion we have. There's nothing bad about anger. There's nothing bad about disappointment. It's just we don't have a good relationship with it. So we don't allow ourselves to feel angry. We're suppressed. And so between those two things, we can't actually have a real, vulnerable, authentic interaction because we're afraid to make mistakes. We're afraid to admit those mistakes. And then when we admit them, we see someone's anger as punitive. And it's like, no, that's not punitive.
Yeah.
People are allowed to be angry and disappointed in you.
Yeah.
It
No,
won't
and
last
even
forever.
yeah, and even when you get angry, sometimes we feel that we have to make the other person feel the same, right? It's like I'm angry right now,
Yes,
so you have to be angry. You have to
that's
feel what I'm
right.
feeling, and we have to share that instead of just
But
saying,
I get
"Listen,
that from the
I'm."
perspective of
Yeah,
empathy, though. People do need validation for their emotions.
sure. Yeah, but not to the point. And I think if they don't get that, what I we often see is that they go to a place where I need you to feel it too. Then, right? And there's nothing about I need you to feel it to understand it. Here's another example that just
I
happened
think
this morning.
sincerity plays it. Sorry, I got to say something on this. I think, girl, when you said it just happened this morning, now I'm nervous because I'm like, what bombshell is he going to drop on me that he wouldn't tell me
No,
before we
this is
got on this
good.
podcast? Here's the thing with this stuff.
Sincerity.
I think when we talk about empathy, some people that I know whose initials are KK might they go through the motions of empathy,
Yeah.
but it doesn't always come across as sincere. They're going through the I'm going to check the box, but it's not like, whoa, you know what? Like I get why you're angry. You know, like, man, you have every right to be upset, right? Like, I think a lot of people miss the opportunity for the sincerity through the empathy, but they're going through the
Sure.
motions and they're saying words, and I hear this all the time. I understand why you feel that way, but you don't understand anything if you're saying it like that. I want you to go to the place of like, I understand that you're angry, and I understand that you're angry, you know, maybe because it makes more work for you, like, or I understand that you might be angry because, like, I think there's a in these trainings, what people have been taught through the, you know, maybe the late 90s 2000s, when we were learning communication tools, we were taught what to say, and but we weren't taught how to feel about what we're saying. And I think that that's the part that's missing, because it does miss sincerity. And without sincerity, trust will never be there. You're
Yeah.
welcome.
And
Thank you. Podcast over.
listen, I can understand that, but we have to be mindful too that, you know, if you either trust what the person says or they don't, right? If the pattern repeats itself, then that's a different conversation,
No, I
because
think
you
that's too
can't,
black and white, Kyle. I
no, but
disagree.
you
It's
can't
not that
tell
you.
someone, especially me, you cannot tell someone how am I going to feel and how I'm not going to feel, right? Because
No,
I know
it's not
me,
about you
and
feeling it. It's about you,
hold on, let me
and
finish.
not just you.
Trust
I'm
the
talking
process.
generally with people, but
Trust the
it's not.
process. Let me
It's,
finish. Okay,
but
trust
then
the
you'll talk
process.
forever, and then you'll move on to the
No,
next subject, and then won't get
no.
an opportunity to
If
say it. Basically,
someone
this is why we got divorced.
if someone was tracking, they'll realize you talk way more than I do. Okay?
It's
Let the
true.
church say amen. So let me just
Amen.
come back to that. It's just if you, because what I heard was if you're missing the words that to really validate the person who understood what you're saying, then that's a different story. Because there's times when, yeah, I admit I get it, got it. That's the thing. I'm ready to move on. I don't want to be crying over spilt milk. Some people want to cry over spilt milk. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but if you're saying, hold on, Kyle, I think you're moving too fast. I need to understand when you say you understood what happened, what exactly does it? Because it's important for you to hear those words and understand that. Not a problem. But just because I don't say it in that moment doesn't mean I don't understand, nor do I
I
care.
I think this is the problem with leadership, though, is that there isn't enough of the human first, and the human first requires an emotional
Sure.
connection. And I know there's some leaders out there, there's some pragmatists and objective thinkers, I'm making quote signs, that say this, but there was a meta-analysis done on thousands of studies about emotion. And when we talk about be objective, remain pragmatic, check your emotions at the door,
Right.
that is, unless you are not neurotypical, that is humanly, it is biologically impossible. Every circumstance we have goes through emotion first. It goes through emotion first. It's just some people lead with emotion and some people have it tucked further back, but it is impossible to
Totally
bypass
agree with you.
emotion unless you are not
Yeah.
neurotypical. So why I'm bringing this up is because when we lead with human first, it does require something called emotional granularity. This is part of emotional intelligence. It means, because this is what happens, people check the box. It's like, I understand why you feel that way. It's like, but that's just a transaction that we were taught to say. We were not taught to feel through that transaction. Emotional granularity is a part of emotional intelligence. Emotional granularity means we use emotion specific words in a granular way. By doing that, what we create is flexibility in our thinking. So we have less fixed thinking. When you say things like you either trust what a person's saying or you don't, that is not flexible thinking. That's binary. It's black and white.
Sure.
And I would ask you to say, but it is possible to be uncertain about your trust about what somebody is saying. It is possible to say, I trust this part of it, but not this part of it. It is possible to say, I'm not sure if I trust it yet. I need to see what comes in actions. And I think that our listeners are going to listen to this and say, Christopher's right, Kyle's wrong. And they will trust what I have to say.
And if they continue listening, they'll hear how the same thing you just accused about the black and white thinkings, when is you didn't hear those words you didn't hear, you thought, okay, they didn't, right? And you're absolutely right. It comes back to that conversation that we build around trust that says either you're going to engage in conversation, you're going to ask for what you need so you can hear what you need, or be very clear with, hey, I'm feeling this way right now. I may be feeling that you may not have heard me, right? And again, it still goes into that communication. But this story I want to tell about what you talked about the vulnerability.
We're still telling
vulnerability-based trust, about making it safe for them to actually engage. So this morning, one of our employees sent me a message, and I'll read it literally
team
verbatim.
Members. I like the word team member better than employee.
Team members. Okay, I trust that we're talking about the same people. So the conversation was, that came over a text. It says, "Good morning, Kyle. I will be late by 30 to 40 minutes today, FYI." So my response, because now think about it as a leader, how would you respond to that? Right? And we know how certain leaders would have responded to it.
Well,
right?
I know, totally. And the funny thing is I look at that and I'm like, in our office, what's late? I don't know what's been communicated to him because he's on your team, but we, for the most part, we have a pretty flexible, depending on the role, like obviously, we need our executive assistant sitting at the front desk, when clients come in or whatever. Right. But certain time periods, although there's still flexibility there, but it's funny. It's like, what's late? Like, to me, that's like an opportunity for us to further communicate what that means. It's like, well, to be clear, late would be like no communication. I think what you did is, it's not an admission of lateness. It's more an inform. Hey, I'll be coming in at this time, but you're not late.
There's Guy. Why, when I'm about to interrupt you raise your voice? Is that your indication of I'm not supposed to interrupt you?
I just feel like there's so much I have to say, Kyle, and when I look at our podcast listenership, I don't think anybody's actually listening.
Anyway, so further to that text, I said, my reply was, no worries. Thank you for letting me know. Right? And I figured it was end of that. We'll see the person when they get here, not a problem. But this is the part where we know that person is where we're now letting them know they can trust to be honest with us when we talk about some of that tip, because the response was...
Before you give the response, I think that's exactly it. How you responded to that indicated safety. It's like, no problem. Like, no big deal, right?
Right.
How you responded to that, if you had said, okay,
why are you late? How come you're late?
Thanks for letting me know.
You're supposed to be here. Yeah.
Yeah. Or why are you late? Or even like, okay, it's day 2, so because this is a new team member, right? So it's like, it's like, okay, it's day 2. Like how you responded to that immediately indicates. And I think the good thing that the great thing about your leadership style, Kyle, is that you are able to put it in perspective, right? So quickly. It's like you can quickly go to, what is the actual impact of this, not what's my emotional impact of this. And so despite the fact that I like to rag on you so much, because you do deserve it for being an unemotional monster, this is one of the things. This is one of the things you do extremely well, is that you can set your own emotion aside, not set it aside. I think you filter through it very quickly and you say, here's my emotional response to it, but here's the actual impact. So your response to it was so appropriate.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And so And then the team member went on to say, hey, no problem. Because I said, thank you for letting me know. He said, no problem. He said, so confidently, I switched off my alarm and I thought I would just sleep for 5 minutes. And then that became an hour. Right? And so I saw that he trusted to tell me what the reason was. I didn't ask for it because exactly what we said is, hey, no problem. This has happened because there's no pattern. There's no trend yet. There's no need for me to reiterate or attendance policy or this policy or that policy. Right? So for next time, this is a warning. Like there's no need for that. Right? So I put it back, and he went to a place of vulnerability based trust where he's now admitting
he literally told you.
He just said, hey, this is what is happening.
He literally told you. He's like,
about the alarm, and I
turned my alarm off and I fell asleep.
Fell asleep, right?
And then to anybody.
Absolutely. And it does happen. It does happen. It's not it could. It does happen.
And the question is that even a mistake? Like, I think it's like, well, you made a mistake, or that was a micro failure or whatever. And it's like, is it a mistake, or is it just part of being a human being? Like, that's not a mistake. It's a part of being a human being.
Yeah. And even as we think about the reopening, of the city and all this stuff that's happening, there's going to be some adjustments. Back to your point earlier about checking at the door. It's not like, okay, before, COVID, we were on time, we did all these things, because there's going to be a transition period. And I think that's a whole nother thing that we need to be talking about, but there's going to be a transition period. So my response to that, because I want to show I appreciated the honesty, right? And for him to actually step into that and further building trust. These are some tips I'm going to give you guys in a second. I continued by saying, no worries, your body and mind needed rest, is what it sounds like. Welcome back to the work life. And the team member's response was, yeah. You know what I mean? And so again, and that's it. There's no need. And, when we see this person, we're like, hey, how are you doing? Just to check in. So they could also reaffirm, because it's happening via text, we could also reaffirm that, hey, it was no issue. Thank you for letting me know. I appreciate that information. Because it's important, right, for them to see how you received it, right?
And
not treat that differently.
You showed real empathy when you said, like, hey, your body and mind needed rest. Like that's empathy. And maybe I didn't. Like, maybe he went to bed, like maybe he had like 10 hours of sleep and he was just like in that cozy spot and he just kind of dozed off or whatever. Like the point is you actually didn't know. But I think the point is that it was an attempt at empathy. And I think that what that does is it creates a safe place. Kyle, I know that we have so much more to say on this. And so I am looking for part 2 on this podcast.
We actually should. I really
actually,
think
Kyle,
we
are.
Yeah.
We're gonna stop it here because I think people have got their microdose for inspired action. So folks, think about where you can take inspired action in your life right now to create trust through vulnerability. Where could you make a different change? Maybe you need to go have a conversation with someone where you got mad at them and say, actually, I was afraid. Maybe you need to go to someone and say, hey, I overreacted. Or, maybe you need to go to somebody and say, look, like I'm struggling right now for the following reasons.
Yeah. And before the next podcast that we talk about this, there's 3 things I want to leave you with.
Kyle, let's do it in the next one.
Okay. See you soon.
It's our goal to build a global community of inspired action takers. And we can only do that with your help. So if you love inspired action, please leave a review on your favorite podcasting app and share us on your socials. You've heard from us. Now we want to hear from you. Go to inspiredactionpodcast.ca and tell us, what is the inspired action you took this week? Next week on Inspired Action for Imperfect Humans.
Hey, I'm not a perfect human being. What we're not going for is perfection. What we're going for is a new relationship with it.